I've been asked to speak, and I appreciate you coming to the session, about mixed martial arts and the journey we've taken, but I hope my message represents all emerging niche sports. So the audience that we have here, we got our mainline sports, which you cater to very well, but also the niche sports, and I would expect that MMA would be one of those, and jiu-jitsu. But let me just, for those who haven't have the understanding of MMA, MMA is really a fairly new word. The terminology of MMA, which stands for mixed martial arts, first came about in 1993, and how it came about was, for centuries, every martial art says, my martial arts is better than yours. Judo is better than Taekwondo. Wrestling is better than boxing. Catch wrestling is better than Sambo. So there was always these arguments over the years of history of what martial arts was the best. And in 1993 in the United States, there was a gentleman called Rorion Gracie who put together an event called Ultimate Fighting Championships, which is today known as the UFC. Back then in 1993, there was a $50,000 award, and they had very little rules. The only rules were no eye gouging, no crunching between the legs, and no biting. But other than that, they put him in what they called an octagon or a protective cage. They didn't use a ring, because a ring you can go out of the ring and fall on the floor. So the cage, as they call it, or the octagon there, was to protect the fighters with less rules. And away they went. No time limits. It was submission which is submission or pass out or verbal submission. So you either got knocked out, passed out, or you gave up and said, I give up, right? And and for some, they thought, for the people that were, I guess, uninitiated, they just thought it was like human cockfighting. But for the people that were in the sports, that have trained and dedicated their life to the sport, it was an opportunity for them to show their wares and test it against the other martial arts in the ring. So it actually brought the best of the best to actually not only for the money back then for $50,000, but to test their skill and represent their art. At the end of the day, a guy called Gracie ended up winning, and Gracie is a well-known family with jiu-jitsu. He was the lightest person within the competition and ended up having 3 fights to the finals and ended up winning the next 2 UFCs. Now today, UFC is a global brand, and they're holding events all over the world, and I want to talk to that a little bit more as we speak. But this is interesting. If you Google the fastest growing sport in the world, this is what you get: mixed martial arts. Mixed martial arts is currently the fastest growing sport in the world in relationship to the shifting of the fan base as well as the people taking place, the people participating in jiu-jitsu or mixed martial arts. So mixed martial arts covers a lot of disciplines: Olympic sports, boxing, kickboxing, karate, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, wrestling, judo, and all others. So it currently is the fastest growing sport. Now, this graph here shows a 3-year change in the fan base in the United States. I don't know if there's been a research done here, but obviously this is the most current that I could get. So it says the UFC, which is a brand name for a mixed martial arts event. And it has the most significant growth over the traditional sports like the NFL, which is the National Football League, the Major League Baseball, National Basketball Association, National Hockey League, NASCAR Racing, Major League Soccer, with 4 of those are Olympic sports. But what you may not know is that jiu-jitsu was the predominant martial art form that led to the enormous growth and popularity of the UFC, because it was won by the Gracies, the first couple of ones. But that's the most interesting part, that the fan base has been sharp and is inclined, more so because it's been an event. And that trickle on from the event has brought the participation of people competing in similar events around the country. So it is a competition. It's not like you have a martial arts and you get striped by doing your katas, but you actually got to compete. You have the opportunity to compete within this sector. So yesterday, there were over 10,000 spectators to attend the first UFC event at Adelaide Arena. Ali mentioned some of the work that I put together with Tom Hunter and the Office of Rec and Sports. This couldn't have happened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we were C-class rules with the ring. An organization like the UFC couldn't come to town. And out of the 10,000 people, it brings a spill-on event for the community of South Australia. But since 2010, we have worked, again, which I mentioned, with Tom Hunter from the Boxing and Martial Arts Compliance Officer, the Office for Recreation for Sports, as well as sanctioning bodies to change the rules and regulations to allow that event to occur that was here yesterday. One of the key things that we've learned, though, is that after investigation, we realized the process was going to take up to 3 years to achieve. It was going to be a journey. So we drafted up a plan and we started the journey. The key point from this message is that the partnership of the private side, and I'll call the private sector, which was MMA Down Under, and the government working together to achieve a common goal to clear the way for an event such as UFC to come to town, provided the framework to take a measured and innovative approach to gain formal support for the changes required in the areas that had high potential for opposition. Which is currently the case in Victoria, which has been resolved, and currently in Western Australia. So in Western Australia, the UFC cannot go to Western Australia. And just recently, with the new change in government in Victoria, that has been passed in Victoria, and the UFC are going there in November. I'd like to think that it had something to do with South Australia, beat them to the punch, and they got ticked off like they did with all the other stuff, and then they kind of committed. So, but I don't think that's the case. But the key message here is that before we started the process, we had to investigate before we innovated, right? I know the theme is innovate and grow. But we had to investigate. We needed to get the facts on growth, participation, and injury risks. So when the questions arise and those vocal negative few came up, we were ready to go. We had our path, and we were able to kind of stop those short when those challenges arose. So in preparing for this talk today, I noticed that on your strategic plan for the Office of Recreational Sports, one of them is to help and assist more Australian athletes winning on the international stage. Now, MMA and the UFC is a professional sport, but as I mentioned to you earlier, the predominant part or a key part of mixed martial arts is jiu-jitsu, which is a growing sport and which is an amateur sport. So what I'd like to do, as Bernard touched on, that there are growing trends in awareness on global emerging sports, not only brought about by a change in demographics, but the change in sports like the UFC. And I just want to give you kind of an example, which is something that I'm familiar with. Okay, so this is what I'm involved in as the president of the Jiu-Jitsu Federation, but I guess I'm asking you to think about how this example can work in every other category. So if innovation is the key driver to achieve sporting excellence and assist more South Australian in competing and winning on national and international events, are you across all the global emerging sports that fall within this category? So again, prior to 2009, so this picture is from Saturday. Saturday before the UFC, we had the South Australian State Championships for Jiu-Jitsu. So prior to 2009, South Australian athletes were training in jiu-jitsu, but there were no jiu-jitsu competitions being run in South Australia. So athletes who wanted to compete had to travel interstate to be able to compete, which was both costly and time-consuming. And that prevented the sport from growing in this state because it was not a platform for athletes to compete and get recognized and get the skill and the experience of competing. So when recognizing this as a barrier to sport, kind of kicking and scratching, I became president of the Federation of Jiu-Jitsu in South Australia, which is affiliated with the national body. So we actually formed a national body. At that stage, the head office was in Victoria. I got together with other colleagues, and we formed a national body to be able to do that. The first competition was held in 2009. There were 30 competitors, 3 clubs, no children, and no females competing. This last Saturday in this picture, this is at the Adelaide Arena. We had 200 competitors, over 200 competitors from 20 clubs, 60 children, and 30 females competing. right? The biggest involvement we've had across that sector. And it's one of the largest martial arts competition in South Australia. There is no other larger competition, and that has grown within that short period of time. There's other clubs, certainly, but not other competitions. This represents approximately 30% of the jiu-jitsu practicing communication in South Australia. Not everyone competes, you don't have to, but those that want to compete is roughly around 30%. So jiu-jitsu is experiencing the highest growth rate of any martial arts sector. And in August, the national championships will be held in Adelaide, where we expect over 6 competitors throughout Australia and New Zealand. So everyone that qualifies in the medal winner throughout all states of Australia and New Zealand come to every 6 years, we move states. We go through all the states and it comes back. This year it's back in South Australia. So on Saturday, this is pictures from Saturday, at the state championships, these kids or these children from one club qualified to represent South Australia at the national championships. So these are medal winners from Saturday. If you win a medal, you qualify to represent your state and your club at the national championships. Then at the national championships, if you win again, you qualify to represent your state and your club and your country at the World Jiu-Jitsu Championships, which are going to be held this year in the United States. And you have to be a medal winner of an affiliated federation to be able to do that. So what I guess I'm trying to say, there's this emerging sports that many of you may not have known about or known about. Well, we've got kids winning on a national and international level medals. So the kids are there. Michael is my son. So I'll just caveat him. I must get out there. He's one of the first Australian, South Australian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. It takes on average a minimum of 10 years to get a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. And most on average for Australians, it takes an average of 14 years to get a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. The average Australian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners took it on average about 14 years. So Michael, again, I just wanted to make the point here. In 2014, Michael represented South Australia at the National Jiu-Jitsu titles that were held in Victoria, so it was the national champs. And then he won that. He won the open black belt division. And then he had the opportunity to represent Australia at the World Championships in Los Angeles in November 2014. At the World Champions, he went on to finish third, alongside Brazil, who was the winner, and an American who finished second. But it was the first time that an Australian in the adult black belt division has had the opportunity to stand on the dais at a recognized world championship. So what's the point here? Not only am I just kind of proud of my son, right? But it's the example that there are sports like jiu-jitsu that are part of a wider thing that still largely go unrecognized in the supporting process of some of the strategic planning of not only just here, and I do believe that, again, that it does need to be self-funded. But I'm not using this as an example for jiu-jitsu. I'm using this for an example of the demographics and the changes of other sports similar to my story, which I've told you in jiu-jitsu, that are emerging and are not a mainstream core sports, but you can see with the rapid growth of what I explained, could and will be that in the future and should come under the radars. So I guess in kind of just wrapping this up, there are examples of other emerging sports and sports people that have probably yet to be identified in South Australia. I'm sure there is, that we're not all aware of. But to better achieve growth from diversity, I think the investigation, the acknowledgement, plus innovation to achieve a sustainable growth for current and future South Australian athletes is going to be vital in your role that you play within this great state that we live in, and how proud it is to see a South Australian stand up on any dais within the world and any sport that we support our kids in, to be able to say that. So thank you for your time and everything that you do for us and the South Australian sporting community. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, we looked at the membership database. And we realised, we all know that croquet is a very old game, right? It's, hundreds of years old. And most of our members, in fact 80% of them, were over 65. And that was a little bit disturbing. Also, our clubs were very insular in their way of thinking. They had forgotten how to connect with the outside world. They went to their club, they did their little thing, it was all about them and their members. So when you talk to them about you're a sporting club, that means you're a community organisation, so are you out in the community? They would just give you a blank look because they had no idea how to connect with the community. It was all about them. And when you asked members about, well, what will happen when you can't play croquet at your club anymore? What's going to happen to the club? Some people even said to me, well, that doesn't matter because I won't be around then. So that was a little bit of a concern. So we looked at a lot of different things. We looked at the ASC market segmentation report that came out last year. And we looked at what the emerging trends were in sport. And we found some really positives, some really good positives for croquet out of that. And one of them was that people would like to go play sport. They've got less time, so they want to go and play sport in a much shorter time frame. They want to go and play, and then they want to get on with the rest of their day because they've got so many other things that they've got to juggle. So they still wanted to play, but they didn't have that same time capacity that they may have had 20 years ago. And the other thing was that some people weren't really that engaged in really physical sport anymore. So they may have had an injury when they were young, so they weren't able to play full-on physical, sweaty sport anymore. Or they just didn't want to do it anymore. They wanted to do something else that was a little bit more passive, but just as strategic. So that was a really big thumbs up for croquet, and we could see a lot of opportunities out there just looking at that report. So we also looked at our strategic plan, which hadn't been done over for quite some time. We threw that one out the door, and we got a new strategic plan, which our vision was for a modern game connected with community. And we sort of worked with that from there.
Well, historically, would you say that croquet's been innovative? I think I know the answer to this, but
Well,
I can
you
imagine
know,
this would have been a pretty big shift.
A lot of people would say that croquet hasn't been innovative, but being such an old game, there's two things, and it's really quite incredible. Back in about 1900, there was very few things, and croquet was one of them, that women could do without being chaperoned with men. Croquet was one of those things, and that's why everybody played croquet.
Does that mean
Because
it's not a
you
very
could-
sexy sport?
It was sexy.
You're allowed, it was.
You could go out without your chaperone and play with the guys. And what happened was the ball would get accidentally hit off into the bushes. So off they would trot behind the bushes to look for the ball. The other thing about croquet that was really excellent and gave us heaps of things was, and we've heard a lot about this morning, about gender. It was the only game, and still is in Australia, and always has been, the game that women and men play together. All the events at state and national level are not segregated. Anybody can enter. It's all on your ability. So they were two really important things and really great opportunities for us to build on.
I don't know about you, but I can see a glaring marketing of going off into the bushes. I can see that working. So we get to hammer time. Now, do we have a little bit of a promo that you wanted to play?
That's coming up
All
after.
right, no worries. So tell us about hammer time and what it
Okay.
is, and also how the name came about. Because this is
Okay.
where we start to talk about this really great innovation.
Yeah, well, it got very exciting. We knew we needed to change, and we really needed to market the sport. We needed to raise our profile. We've been here in South Australia for 100 years, and we had 40 clubs, and no one really knew we existed. So we needed to do that. We needed a brand, and we needed to really knuckle down. So what we did was we went to the marketplace, and we worked with some people, and we came up with a few different names. none of which really grabbed my attention until we got to the name Hammer Time. And the reason that Hammer Time was so good was because if you're a young person, and that was our new target market, of course, with all our members dying around us, if you're a young person, you can connect to the word Hammer Time because you know who MC Hammer is. So it had that special little affiliation with them. But if you're an older person and you wanted to try croquet, you didn't know what Hammer Time meant, except that it meant you can come and try croquet. So in actual fact, it worked perfectly.
So how does Hammer Time and that type of croquet differ from the more traditional, with the members dying around you, that sort of croquet?
Okay, so what we did, firstly, was we got right away from the whole idea that it was a come and try. Because when I hear the word come and try, I think, oh, again, you know, boring. It's not exciting. There's so much going on in Adelaide. If you're up with the media, you see every weekend how many events there are on every weekend, trying to get your attention to get that slice of your leisure time. So the way I looked at it was that we were in competition with every single event on in Adelaide, and that's how it was marketed. It was marketed as a pop-up event and just wanted to grab that bit of attention, make it irresistible for people to come and have a go, because most of Adelaide had never tried croquet. So what we did was we tried to also create a very inviting atmosphere. We wanted to change clubhouses into venues because we now had an event that we were marketing. It wasn't just a come and try, come to our place. It was come to this awesome venue where we've got something really special happening that you've never done before, so come and do it. So we added some value. We got a DJ. We got some music. We got some nice lights. We changed the venues very slightly, just enough to make a difference and easy enough that members could do it, because it was all about members doing this. And we did the pilot at Hutt Road, and there was something else that had to be done to make it really attractive for especially the younger demographic, and that was to get some added value into an already low-cost event that had, as well as that, discounts for families. So when we came up with the name Hammer Time, I had a long, big think, and I thought a lot about the F word. A lot. Fun. Gotta make it fun. So the way to make it fun was to incorporate something else into it. So I approached a few hip-hop dance studios, thinking that that just tied in so perfectly with the word Hammer Time. And fortunately, I got someone on board to sponsor us, because we had to do all this with no money pretty well. So, you know. So we got Hyperdance on board, and bam, we had entertainment. We were happening.
What is your traditional founding member of croquet think when they see those guys carving up on their beautiful, pristine lawns?
Well, what we did was, of course, we had to sell this whole idea to our old members who weren't used to doing things like this. And we got them to come and deliver the program. We chose 5 or 6 key venues across Adelaide, and we asked them to come in every week, and one club each week deliver it. And we showed them how it worked, and we had it all worked out. It was very, very well organised, right down to everything. And they came, and they stood there, and these are people that were quite anti, some of them, the whole idea of even the thought of engaging younger people. And they stood there and they said, wow, this is fantastic. Here's people enjoying our sport. And guess what? We're having fun. We can have a glass of wine. And they walked around the clubhouse and saw what we did to it, which wasn't very much, really. And they said, we can do this. And it just went from there, because everyone who went there and did it, the members that did it, stood there and they thought, this is great. we can work with this vehicle to get croquet out and to connect with the community. So it just went from there.
So they're the warm and fuzzies. What about the fiscal repercussions from it? What has it meant for the clubs and for the state body, I guess, a program like this?
Well, there's been, the obvious spin-offs, increased revenue at clubs, increased participation. We had about 1,100 people come to our launch, which was fantastic. Some clubs had more people there than they've ever had at their club, new members. But one thing for me that really stood out was the total integration, and Bernard talked about it this morning, the social cohesion that we've been able to achieve with this program, because we've got older members standing on the lawns, sharing their knowledge that someone shared with them so many years ago when they first started playing. And they are so proud to do that. And the patrons that come are just so into the older people being there for them and showing them and helping them and showing them how to do a jump shot and showing them how to have a little game and a competition that we run every week. So it's really been a fantastic way for members to feel proud of their sport and feel proud of marketing it, if you like, to people that have never tried it before. And the other thing that's been fantastic at club level is that clubs are connecting with the community. They all went out and got local sponsorships. Some had dancing, some had hip hop. We had the North Adelaide Football Club Rockettes performing at one venue and various other prizes happening. But the club committees now understand very well the importance of connecting with the community, the cross-promotion through social media that happened, and getting to know these people on a personal level and developing that relationship with their sponsors. They now understand what sponsorship's all about, that mutual beneficial arrangement between partners. So that's been really rewarding.
Oh, it's rewarding just listening to the pride in your voice, actually. No, seriously, talking about something like this. So I guess, I don't want to load you up too much considering you're the only paid employee of the whole place, but where to now? Where to now? I mean, the new people
Yep.
are involved in your sport. How can you make the most of them, and how do you stop them from getting a bit bored with what you're putting out there?
Well,
What's
we're
next?
fully into social media. So we've got the Instagram, the Twitter and the Facebook pages running hot. But we're going to do new competitions, new events for beginners, girls, guys. Don't worry, there's a few tricks up our sleeve yet.
I think we should do a cross-promotion hammer time in MMA down there. Yours sounds tougher than mine, actually.
We've got good lawns.
So who were the real drivers for this journey? I mean, obviously yourself, but
Well-
it sounds like it was very, very important to be able to get buy-in from all of your different clubs around as well.
It was. I think it was only a couple of years ago, so it's been a really quick transition, really, when you think about it. But I think from my perspective, it was easy for me because I wasn't involved in club level. I was looking at it from a business point of view. So I went to Croquet Australia and proposed that they appoint a sport development officer. And I went to our board and I said, this is what I want to do. Can we do it? And they said, yeah, let's go for it. And they've supported all of it. And they're there every week.
So what cheap wine? No? Yeah.
We have awesome wine, but it is cheap.
So what advice would you give to everybody here? I mean, this is what we're here for, Innovate or Suffocate. We're here to find out and get tips from you. What advice would you give to sports similar to your own, shoestring budget,
Yeah,
and maybe an older demographic, or trying desperately to attract new members?
yeah. Well, I think you have to have a really good imagination. I think it really helps to work with people who are well connected in the community with more than one age group, so that they can relate to whatever age group your members are and relate to perhaps a new target market in the community. It really helps to have someone who's that link, who can work between the clubs and the community and help the clubs to to build up their own event. And the other thing that's really good is to have someone who has a completely clear vision about what you want to achieve, how you want to achieve it. I think with Hammer Time, we paid a lot of attention to the actual design of the venue and what people wanted. Over and over again, the main thing was to think about, it's not what your members want, it's what your patrons want. And that's the patrons that you're trying to attract. So the members just need to get over that thing that it's all about them, because it's not. It's about the people that you want to come, and they're the most important ones. And the other thing is, don't forget to be having a bit of wow factor in there.
Beautiful. Any other questions for Kathy? Because I know that I was asking a lot there, but she wanted a bit of Q&A. Any other questions from the floor? Yeah, Kylie.
I'm interested, you speak overwhelmingly about how positive people were to the idea. It sounds like you didn't have to sell it. But for a change that big, there had to have been some naysayers.
Oh, yeah.
So did everybody hear that? So just talking about, speak so positively about the change, but there had to have been some naysayers.
Definitely. People resist change, and as people get older, they resist change even more. So there's definitely a lot of meetings and talking and phone calls and visits and emails. But like I said, getting people there was the thing to do. It was the only way to get these members on board. And in fact, last month I managed to get a club there who were quite happy with what they were doing and didn't need to be involved in this and didn't really feel the need for it at all. And I managed to get them along to Hammer Time at Hart Road one night in March. So that was a big tick. Anyway, I walked into the clubhouse at about 7:30 at night, just before the dancing was coming on at interval. And there was the president and the secretary sitting there, both enjoying a glass of wine. And I thought, oh, that's good, they're having a good time. And the secretary, who had been quite opposed to the whole idea, she just looked up to me and said, Kathy, I'm a convert. This is fantastic. Because they could just see that everyone's happy, everyone's having a good time. So that was the way for me to get around stuff like that.
One of the things that I'm really conscious of, representing a club like Port Adelaide, which has a lot of profile and more than we like most of the time, but is the perception that the roles that we play are any different to the roles that you play. In essence, they're virtually the same. It's just about profile and scale, and that's all. The change environment that Kathy's trying to create is very similar to what we're trying to create at Port Adelaide. You're asking people to do something that they're not comfortable with, generally, and you're trying to explain to them why. I'm a big believer in change and the power of change. Change can be good and bad. We generally... And change happens whether you want it to happen or not. What I have tended to find in the past is that if you're proactive about it and are trying to engineer change, you can affect the result. If you sit idle, change is just going to happen around you and you get swept up in it, and it perhaps sometimes takes you in the direction you don't want to go. So I would much prefer to be active in that process. I'm also a great believer in innovation as the stimulant to change. I believe innovation brings energy and has the capacity to inspire people to do things that they may not necessarily think they're capable of, or that they may not necessarily understand why they need to do it, but it's inspirational. It creates an energy that I think is very often positive and important. I've been in 2 environments in my work career which has required transformational change. Mostly we go along and we tweak here and there and we guide it along, and that can be revolutionary in its own right. But in the environments that I've been in, it's been about transformational change. The first one was in radio. I worked with a group called Nova. We built Nova from the ground up, and we went out with this was the first FM radio licence in 20 years, and so we felt as if we had an opportunity to change the radio landscape. And that was a big challenge. And we went out with a position which said, sounds different. Now, think about that as a challenge. So it's radio, and you're going to come out and say, well, given everything you've heard before, we're now going to sound different. Now, that was quite easy in the initial stages. The challenge came in day 2. Once they'd heard it, how do you sound different tomorrow? Very, very challenging. And what we created there was an environment where everyone was in the mindset of, if it's been done before, it can't happen at Nova. That was a very, very challenging, highly creative, demanding environment, which was beautiful to be in. And we were able to build it from the ground up. Now, Port Adelaide wasn't quite like that. So Port Adelaide, everyone familiar with Port Adelaide? Right? Heard of it? Right. So Port Adelaide, when I started it at the end of 2011, was in an awful mess. But its history was incredible. 145 years old, 37 premierships, 75 grand finals. 75 grand finals in 145 years. That's pretty good DNA, right? Every second year, they're expecting to play in a grand final. Now, at the end of 2011, we were getting absolutely smashed. On field, off field, we're in the papers for all the wrong reasons. And we had to create an environment of change. And the change has happened quite rapidly. But the most fundamental change is probably not as clear as the scoreboard would suggest. Everyone's talking about premiership favourites, beating Hawthorn, game day experience, all fantastic. That's the stuff you can see. The most significant change that is occurring is the whole purpose of the Port Adelaide Football Club. And that's taken quite a bit of changing. So a club that is as single-minded as that invites a Nord guy in. That's to start changing things. Not easy. But what we've changed it to be is this. We exist to win premierships, yes, but we've got to do it the right way. Now, in the environment that we're in, which is filled with highly paid athletes, drugs, cheating, win at all costs, all of those sorts of external influences, when you bring in and make your community proud into the equation, you're redefining the role of the football club. And we think it's a really important evolution of our club. Think about a kid who comes out of school. In his first year, he's earning $100,000. And by year 3, he's probably earning $500,000. Think about having a conversation with him about putting back into the community, embracing our fans, playing a broader role in your footy club than just going out and having a kick. It's not easy. Overlay the motivation of the coach. If he fails last night, gets smashed in the paper today. So I go to my meeting at 4 o'clock this afternoon and say, mate, Kenny, I need 15 of your players to support Paul Vandenberg's Aboriginal program later this week. He's not necessarily as responsive as you'd like him to be, right? That's the challenge. But when you put yourself out there and say, we're here to win, but we're here to do it the right way, it changes the narrative of the footy club. So, to get to that spot didn't happen overnight. I didn't walk in at the end of 2011 and say, we're going to change our whole role. But we had to start somewhere. And we started with a few really basic principles. The first one was just start. We've got to get out of the papers for all the wrong reasons. We're providing the media with, on a daily basis, things to talk about that were negative. So we said, let's just start by doing good things. So with the players, you start to talk to them about going out on visits to food bank, to schools, do more clinics. Had this classic example. We do family days. And in the first year, I watched our boys line up and they signed autographs. And they were given a 45-minute window to sign all these autographs. And on the 45-minute mark, they all left. Right, so there's 300 kids still lined up, had to turn around to their mum and dad and leave. Well, you say, well, what sort of impression are we making? This year, we had to bring it indoors, turn the lights on outside because they were lined up outside, and they stayed, every single player, until 10 o'clock at night to get it done. So it's a change in mindset, but they're little things. This idea of role models. I'm a huge believer that our players need to be held to a different standard. This rubbish about, they're just young lads, they've got to be able to live life. Surely we've got to be more tolerant than that. Rubbish. They are in an elite environment, they're being paid a lot of money, and they are expected to live their lives and play at a high level. I don't care if you're 18 or 28, if you play for Port Adelaide, that's the requirement. We talk about this drug issue, right? If we can't say no to drugs as people in the sporting environment, or alcohol, or gambling, who can? If it's not us, who is it? We know it's a rampant problem. So we're a big believer in the roles that clubs, sporting clubs, play and should play, and in our case, the role that our players need to take. Now, we're going to stuff it up, right? You're going to read in 3 months' time someone doing something, but it's how you deal with it as a club that defines you. And I'm telling you, we don't stand for that. So, we had to change the narrative of our club. What do we stand for? What role do we want to play? And through that, we created an environment that encouraged innovation and it enabled it to flourish to the point now where I think we do some of the best stuff in Australian sport through our club. Started with changing the internal expectation. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of small things, small good things that just get the whole conversation started. Kilburn Footy Club. Now, massive issues. Lisa's here, you're involved in that. Kilburn Footy Club had a racial problem with the Sudanese African community and the Aboriginal community. And they were fighting, both feeling alienated inside the community. The Kilburn Footy Club recognised the problem, came to Port Adelaide, we worked on a solution, and what we did was we created a team for the African community. It was a pilot program, 12 weeks. Said, well, why don't we invite them in to play? We did that, thinking that all the young males would turn up. We had 25 women turn up to play who had been housebound. Came in, played. We taught them how to do it, integrated them into the club. Overnight, the racial tension disappeared because they're part of the club. Incredible. Now, we failed because we didn't build a program that was sustainable. It dropped the next year. Problems start to rise up again. But the power of that is enormous inside that community. I was part of, I visited the Teacher Gully Footy Club a few years ago. Spoke to a kid who was in the under-14s, Sudanese. And I said to him, mate, how do you enjoy the club environment? I thought he'd say, fun, I enjoy it, yeah, muck around with my mates. He said, well, mum and dad never come out of their home. At school I get bullied, and this is the only place I feel safe. Now, the Teacher Gully Footy Club is 1,000,000 miles away from the Port Adelaide Football Club in size and stature, but the importance of that club, of that sporting environment, to that kid, you'll all understand it. It is enormously powerful. Enormous. So I know you're all associated with clubs. Understand the role. We're not talking about professional people. We're talking about mum and dad at the under-14 Teacher Gully Footy Club, embracing a young kid, bringing him in, changing his life. That's the power of sport. Port Adelaide, at the elite end, is trying to return to that. And we're doing it in a few different ways, and I'm going to explain a few of those in a minute. But that is an example of clubs, people doing good things. We understood really early on that if you were to try and create an environment like this, where you want high values, high standards, care, then you've got to fill that club with good people. I was at a conference, very, very privileged to be at a conference in New York in the last month. I listened to two people. The general manager of the Brooklyn Nets, who have just transitioned their basketball club from New Jersey to Brooklyn. Multi-million-dollar franchise, as you can understand. And he was asked, okay, so what was important? How did you do it? He said, right, I got rid of the toxic superstars on my roster, and I said to every player, we are going to embrace this neighbourhood like it's our own. We're the visitors, we're going to embrace it, and we're going to become part of this community. And if you don't want to do that, you can't play for us. Powerful statement. You're talking about people who are on $50 million a year. He called them toxic superstars. Fill your place with good people. People who get it, who are on the same page, aligned values, so that when you're having these discussions, it's not falling on deaf ears. Port Adelaide, we're getting a lot of them. A lot of good people. I also listened to another guy called, I can't even remember his name, the CEO, owner of Hublot, Now, Hublot make watches, $30,000 a pop, right? If you watch the Mayweather fight, it was on the belt. He said, love your people. Share with them your dreams, your passion, your successes, your failure, and most of all, your fears about his employees. You can't do that, can't have that relationship unless your place is filled with good people. We have a responsibility. We're doing important work. Fill it up with people who want to do that work. It's important. We got into the mindset of you've got to give before you take. We're very fortunate. In our playing roster, we have 3 unbelievable young men. Chad Wingard has 5 foster siblings. Jack Homsch, who has, his family is dealing with disability. And we've got Travis Boak, who's just a wonderful, wonderful young man. They're the drivers. And we've got a coach called Ken Hinckley, who absolutely believes in what we're trying to do. They're selfless and they're community-minded. And they believe in the idea that you give before you take. Now, those 3 principles I've spoken about, just set the tone for the club. What I want to talk about now is what's happened as a result of all that. And that might be underneath the radar a little bit, but good things can happen. We have an association with Food Bank. Now, these people provide food to hundreds of organisations around the state. And we, in a moment of crisis, when in my first week, both of our major sponsors walked away. And so we're at the start of the 2012 season with nothing. And this was the moment where we decided, you talk about innovation, Paul, you talk about crisis and pressure. What we decided to do was take a different, the reality was I couldn't find another sponsor. That's the reality. So I had to change the thinking. Now, thinking was, right, how do we make people feel good about their association with Port Adelaide? At the moment, we're a piece of junk. How do we make them feel good? Food Bank came to us and said, our problem is we're doing this good stuff, but no one knows about us, and we can't take it any further. So out of that, we started speaking, and we ended up putting them on our Guernsey. Now, for those of you who don't know, that's $1 million right there in normal terms. And we said, we are going to elevate this cause and we're going to talk about it to everyone. Now, they have, over the last 3 years, we've now moved to a point where they're still our charity partner, but in that first 2 years, it was incredible. It illuminated the problem. We were doing breakfast programs all over the state. We're taking food up in remote communities throughout South Australia. Last year, we built a house for Food Bank. It's been a wonderful, wonderful association. 10 partners have come on who would never deal with Port Adelaide. Came on because of the dual purpose. They liked the project. The state government jumped on board because they understand Food Bank and they believe in it. And it enabled me to change the language of the club. It's not about the win-loss ratio. This is about helping kids go to school with food in their belly, or to end hunger in South Australia. Change the narrative. Very important. We have an incredible Aboriginal program. So we're running Aboriginal programs in remote communities. Our team's here today. Think about that. So these kids don't get past grade 7. In fact, most of them leave school before that. Port Adelaide, through Byron Pickett, Chad Wingard, Nathan Cracker, Gavin Wanganeen, Paul Vandenberg, Wade Thompson, all of our wonderful team at Port Adelaide are taking education opportunities to the APY lands. We're doing remote education out of our classroom at school at Albert and Oval, all with the view to encourage them to stay in there and to think about the opportunities that might exist if they stay in school and get into high school. It's a really big game, but it's important. And it came out of our Aboriginal Power Cup, which was a program which is about keeping kids in school. If you want to play with us, you've got to stay in school, you've got to get grades, all those sorts of things. A footy club doing that. It's really, really important work. Those kids in the next month are going to get a visit from another group of kids that we're working with who are called our Aboriginal Academy team. The Academy team are 15, a little older. They're going to get in a bus, drive to Alice Springs before our game, and they're going to stop at communities along the way, and they're going to sit there with 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds and talk about school. Their opportunity to be in that bus and go into Alice Springs only happened because they stayed in school. It could happen to you. It's inspiring. Next year, that same academy team is going to go to China. And they're going to play against a Chinese team filled with kids who have never been outside of their province, never been out of their neighbourhood. Now you think about the cultural exchange. If it's about opening kids' eyes to what's possible out there and why it's important to stay in, take their responsibility and stay in school and learn about their culture, learn about what the world has to present. Can you imagine what that story is going to be like when those kids, our Aboriginal Academy kids, are there in Alice Springs next year talking about their trip to China? I believe this stuff changes lives. And our team here are delivering on that. This is the next little thing that we're doing. This is Team China with Port Adelaide. I'm going to bore you with another 1-minute video, okay, if you don't mind.
我觉得这一次非常不同，因为我们得到了这个阿德莱德的赞助，所以说我们这一次来到阿德莱德也是一个非常不错的机会。我希望能够让更多阿德莱德的球迷看到中国队的一个身影。我们也希望我们这一次比赛可以取得更好的成绩。
That's Adelaide Oval. It's Team China. Never been out of their neighbourhood. Came over last year, put them in front of the Sydney versus Port Adelaide game, and they played. I'm telling you, they're terrible. They cannot play, right? But I went and visited them back in Hong Kong this year, just a couple of weeks ago, and it just changes their outlook on life. It's the best thing that's ever happened to them. This is about a club, a town, a city, embracing them. What you saw there was this team in the march from the mall to Adelaide Oval, which happens every home game, doing a lap of honour around Adelaide Oval and high-fiving the crowd. Do you reckon they feel welcome? We do this with Chinese students here in Adelaide. By putting the scarf, the Port Adelaide scarf, the Hope Valley scarf, the Norwood scarf, the Eagle scarf, the Croquet Club scarf around their neck, they're part of the tribe. They're part of it. It breaks down all barriers. For the young Sudanese kid at Teacher Gully, that is the most important thing in his day, is going to footy training. That's how powerful it is. So then you get to the commercial spot. I think that there's the commercial things happening next door, but there is a commercial aspect to this. We're in business, right? How does this thing work? Give before you take. How do you know you get a result? Renault, it's now on our Guernsey. They joined at the start of 2013, before the revival, before the on-field revival. They did their due diligence. We love your end hunger program. We love what you're about. We love the grassroots. We love the end hunger program. So they joined. Energy Australia, passionate about Aboriginal programs. Didn't know that? Their CEO, massive ambassador for Aboriginal equality and opportunity. They come on board. That's $2 million right there. That guy is Paddy Ryder. Paddy Ryder, one of the great ruckmen in the competition, unhappy with how he was treated at Essendon, has a chance to go anywhere he wants, meets Paul Vandenberg and understands our programs, comes to Port Adelaide. Do good things happen. I don't know what the science in it is, but it's there. I know it is. I see it every day. At whatever level we're at, this is possible. Do good things. The local grocer might look at that and say, you know what, that's worth supporting. I want to be part of that. Our staff, we look after end hunger. They want to go to Fred's van. Someone at Fred's van sees that, they want to support it, and the whole thing goes around. As sporting professionals, sporting club professionals, we have that opportunity. I'd like to think at Port Adelaide we're changing the club, and we're putting ourselves out there a little bit, and we're putting a little bit back in, and hopefully getting a result. And I would encourage you to just understand the role and the opportunity that you will have, and as I said, it can be really profound. Thank you very much.